My name is Sharon Gray. I built a billion-dollar company from nothing. No investors, no safety nets, just grit, strategy, and sacrifice. For decades, I was the face of power, until my own daughter took everything from me over Thanksgiving dinner. One signature, and it was gone. But she didn't just inherit my title. She inherited my enemies, my secrets, and the ruthless world I spent a lifetime surviving. She thinks she's ready to lead. She has no idea what's coming. This isn't just a story about betrayal. It's about legacy, leverage, and what it really costs to win. It was supposed to be Thanksgiving, just family, food, and maybe a toast to the company I'd built from the ground up. Instead, my daughter slid a contract across the linen tablecloth, right between the gold-rimmed plates and untouched cranberry sauce. "I'm taking over the company, Mom," Ellie said. Her voice was calm, practiced. "The board's already voted." For a moment, I thought I'd misheard her. The turkey had just been carved. My grandson was halfway through his mashed potatoes, but the look in her eyes, the same icy determination I'd once seen in the mirror, told me this wasn't a joke. This was a coup, served with stuffing. Decades of boardroom battles had trained me well. My face didn't flinch. Not when I saw her signature on the dotted line. Not when I noticed the perfectly timed newspaper clippings she'd assembled in a neat folder beside the contract. Photos of me shaking hands, cutting ribbons, standing triumphant. Evidence of my reign and my expiration. I glanced at Victor, my brother-in-law, the company's vice president. His glass was already raised in a mock toast. "To new beginnings," he said, smiling without warmth.
I'd never trusted Victor. Not since the day after my husband's funeral, when he started asking questions about leadership transitions. But I never thought he'd go through my daughter to make his move. That was a new kind of treachery, one that tasted like blood and gravy. "We should talk about this in private," I said, my voice low but steady. "There's nothing to talk about," Ellie replied, almost too casually. "The company needs new energy, innovation. I wanted you to hear it from me, with family around. I thought it would be easier." Easier. She used that word like it meant something, like it justified the blindsiding, like it wasn't gutting me where I sat, surrounded by people who owed their lives to what I'd built. I looked around the table. Mark, her husband, avoided eye contact. My grandson froze, sensing the shift in energy. The dinner I'd spent days preparing now felt like a burial. Only I wasn't being buried in a casket. I was being boxed out of my own empire.
I smiled. Not out of warmth, but calculation. "I hope success embraces you better than I ever did," I said, rising from the table. That silence, that tight, uncertain pause that fell over the room, that was the sound of a queen being dethroned, politely, quietly, and without resistance. But what Ellie didn't know, what none of them realized yet, was that I wasn't finished. I'd seen predators in business. I'd fought them, outsmarted them, and now my own blood had chosen to challenge me at my most vulnerable. Let them think I was defeated. Let them toast to new beginnings. Because what they'd just started was war. I closed the door to my bedroom, leaned against it, and finally let the tears fall.
It wasn't just the betrayal. It was the timing, the precision, the fact that Ellie had waited until Thanksgiving, until my guard was down, to strike. She knew how to hit me where it hurt, and she learned that from me. I raised her to be sharp, strategic, unshakable. And now, that strength had been weaponized against me. But I hadn't survived 40 years in this business by folding under pressure. I crossed the room and knelt by the old oak desk in the corner, the one Cole and I bought during our first year of marriage, back when we still believed in happy endings. From the bottom drawer, I pulled out the leather-bound journal, my private archive. It wasn't sentimental. It was strategic. Every deal, every risky call, every alliance I'd forged, documented in detail, not just to remember, but to protect myself if things ever turned. And now, things had turned. I flipped through pages, reliving battles fought and won. I'd kept Victor at bay for years, but I knew he was never content in the shadows. After Cole died, he started circling, offering advice, volunteering for tasks no one wanted, slowly making himself indispensable. But he didn't want to help. He wanted to inherit. And when I didn't hand it over, he found another path. My daughter. Victor was smart, but he was predictable, arrogant, and his mistake was underestimating how much I knew. My phone buzzed. Audrey, my longtime assistant, the only person I'd ever trusted completely. Text. Victor called an executive meeting for Monday. No agenda. Should I attend? My reply, yes. Attend. Record everything. Don't let them know you're still loyal to me. I knew Victor well enough to see the play. He'd use Ellie as a figurehead and quietly consolidate power behind the scenes. But Ellie wasn't ready for that world. She didn't know what she was walking into. She didn't know what I'd done to keep the company afloat during its darkest days. She would. Soon. I stood and looked at the family photo on my nightstand. Cole, Ellie, and me. A perfect frame for an imperfect truth. Cole had wanted to build a company that would outlast him. And I had. But somewhere in that pursuit, I'd lost my daughter. Missed birthdays, graduations, moments I couldn't get back. Now she was at the helm, and I wasn't sure if I was watching her rise or fall. One thing was clear. I wouldn't stop her. Not yet. Not directly. But I wouldn't leave her unprepared either. She thought this was about a title, a corner office, legacy. She had no idea what she was inheriting, or how many enemies came with it. Victor Gray was never loud about his ambition. That's what made him dangerous. While I was out front building the empire, securing investors, weathering market collapses, charming press, he was always in the background, quiet, helpful, harmless, or so I let everyone believe. The truth? He'd been waiting, watching, calculating the exact moment I'd be vulnerable enough to strike. And now, it was clear. He'd chosen my daughter as the dagger. Audrey's call came the next afternoon. She spoke in hushed tones, the way people do when they're walking a minefield. He introduced Ellie to the team this morning, she said. Officially called her the future of the company. I gritted my teeth. And the board? Supportive, publicly, but confused. Nobody expected the transition to happen like this. No memo, no discussion, just a shift. Classic Victor. Skip the process. Present a finished product. Make resistance seem like an afterthought. Audrey hesitated before continuing. He also brought in a consultant, someone you're not going to like. Who? Anthony Wilson. For a moment I couldn't breathe. Anthony Wilson. The same man I forced out 15 years ago for embezzlement. The man who had nearly taken us down from the inside. I hadn't heard his name in over a decade. He walked into the meeting like nothing ever happened, Audrey whispered. When Ellie asked why he was there, Victor stepped in. Said it was about healing old wounds and leveraging untapped experience. I laughed bitterly. He's already sidelining her. Worse, Audrey said. They're reopening the Marshall acquisition, digging through old financials. Anthony specifically asked about Cayman accounts. My hand tightened around the phone. That was supposed to be buried, strategically hidden, sanitized. Ellie didn't know about the Cayman shell companies. She'd never needed to. Until now. And Gerald? I asked, referring to the one board member I'd always trusted. Audrey's voice dropped. He cornered me after the meeting, said, and I quote, "Tell Sharon I'm sorry. I had no choice." I felt a wave of nausea. Leverage? He didn't say, but yes, that's the implication. So Victor had been busy, gathering dirt, playing the long game, waiting for me to get tired, old, sentimental. And now, with Ellie wearing my crown, he was ready to reign. But he was wrong about one thing. I wasn't sentimental. I wasn't done. And I sure as hell wasn't out of the game. He'd used my daughter to stage his rise. What he didn't know was that the daughter he thought was a pawn was about to be caught between two queens. By Monday morning, I knew Victor wasn't just moving fast. He was sprinting. He'd already rearranged the org chart, reframed departments, and brought in Anthony Wilson as a special consultant for international expansion. Ellie was introduced as CEO, but anyone with eyes could see it. She was a placeholder, a figurehead. The real power was being funneled elsewhere, but then came the message that shifted everything. A text from Mark. "Don't trust Ellie. Victor has recordings. They're coming for you next." I stared at the screen, numb. Of all people, Mark had never struck me as particularly clever, but he was perceptive. And this wasn't a guess. This was a warning. I had barely tucked the USB drive back into its hiding place when Ellie knocked on my bedroom door. "Mom?" Her voice was softer now, hesitant. "Can we talk?" I met her in the Japanese gardens. She looked shaken. The power suit she wore didn't match the panic in her eyes. "I don't understand what's happening," she said. "Victor's making decisions without me. Anthony's involved. The board won't talk to me. What aren't you telling me?" I didn't say anything at first. I wanted to see how far she'd come on her own, if she'd pieced it together. But all I saw was confusion and fear. She was in over her head. "You wanted the throne," I told her. "Did you really think it came without thorns?" Her composure cracked. "I need your help." That was the moment, the shift. She wasn't just asking as a daughter anymore. She was asking as a leader out of her depth. I pulled the USB from my purse, placed it in her hand. "This has everything you need to know about Victor, Anthony, and the kind of moves this company made to survive. Before you open it, you need to ask yourself, how far are you willing to go to protect what's yours?" She looked me in the eye, and for the first time in days, I saw it. The steel. The ambition I'd passed down, hardened now by humility. "Whatever it takes," she said. But before she could open the drive, another message arrived. From Mark again. "Don't give her the drive. She's not alone in this." I snatched it back instinctively. Ellie recoiled, shocked. "What's going on?" she asked. "Why would Mark say that?" I leaned in close. "What did Victor promise you, Ellie? What did you trade for that title?" She went still, avoided my gaze. 3 years ago, during our Singapore expansion, she'd secured a deal that saved us from financial collapse. I'd praised her, elevated her. Now she confessed. "I offered incentives, under the table, nothing illegal, by local standards, but off the books." I stared at her. Victor had the evidence, and he'd used it to coerce her into supporting his plan. The Singapore deal was her secret sin and her leash. Victor wasn't just playing the board, he was playing everyone, and we were running out of moves. I'd spent my career guarding the company's reputation, its name, its future, its illusion of integrity. But what arrived on my doorstep that evening shattered all of it in an instant. A simple cardboard box, no return address, just my name, handwritten in pen I instantly recognized. Victor's. Inside, a stack of yellowed documents, faded photographs, and one note on top, in his neat, arrogant scrawl. "You're not the only one with secrets, Sharon. Cole had his own insurance policy. Ask yourself why." My hands trembled as I reached for the top photo. Cole, my late husband, much younger, standing beside a man I hadn't seen in decades but could never forget. Antonio Mancini. The name alone sent a chill down my spine. a shadowy investor with rumored mob ties who had mysteriously vanished from the business scene just as our company began to rise. The next photo was worse. Cole and Mancini mid-argument in a dimly lit restaurant. Then another, showing them with cash, contracts, and other unsavory faces. Underneath the photos, bank transfers, offshore wiring instructions, early capital infusions tied to shell companies I had never authorized. Victor had found them, buried records from the company's first years, deals Cole had made before I ever joined, before the business had gone legitimate, deals that funded our launch, deals with the kind of people you don't list in IPO filings. Mom, Ellie's voice cut through my thoughts as she stared over my shoulder. What is all this? The truth, I said quietly, about your father, about the empire we've built. For so long, I believed I was the one who made compromises, the one who crossed lines to survive. But now I knew. I hadn't started that cycle. I'd inherited it. Cole had laid the foundation with dirty money, and I'd built a skyscraper on top of it. Mark examined the paperwork, his banker's instincts kicking in. These transfers align with your earliest expansion years, your first distribution warehouse, the rebrand. Ellie sat down slowly, as if the weight of it all finally settled on her shoulders. This company, she said softly, it was never clean, not from the beginning. I didn't argue. I couldn't. Outside, the police were wrapping up their report. They'd scanned the package, found no threat. Just emotional shrapnel, expertly timed to detonate during a power struggle. Victor had known exactly what he was doing, not just undermining me, not just Ellie, but tarnishing Cole, the one person we'd both thought untouchable. I looked at the photo again, my husband shaking hands with a criminal. He wasn't the man I thought I married, but he was the man who built our beginning. Ellie's voice was barely above a whisper. If even Dad crossed lines, what do we have left to protect? I met her eyes. Now, we protect the future, not the myth of how we started, but what we choose to become. Because legacies aren't defined by origin stories. They're defined by what we do next. Victor thought he had won. He had the board, the leverage, the narrative. He had Ellie, at least that's what he believed. And for a while, so did I. But what he didn't see coming was us. After the package from Victor, the mood in our house shifted. Ellie wasn't grieving her father's legacy anymore. She was reassessing it. That soft doubt in her voice hardened into something sharper, strategic. And for the first time in her life, she didn't just want power. She wanted revenge. That's when I showed her the envelope I had kept hidden for over a decade, the final card I never thought I'd need to play. Inside it, photographs, medical records, and a notarized letter. Ellie's eyes widened as she flipped through them. This is Aunt Julie? Her aunt, my late sister-in-law, Victor's wife. Officially, she died of a heart condition. Quiet, tragic, and, according to the obituaries, peaceful. Unofficially, Julie came to me a month before her death, bruised, terrified. She'd documented years of abuse, photos, medical visits, even a lawyer's plan to get her out. She never made it. She died the night before she was supposed to leave Victor. Ellie's hands trembled. You think he killed her? I don't know, I said. But if this goes public, he'll be buried in questions, in investigations. And with Anthony Wilson back in the mix, it won't be hard to connect the dots. Public perception is a currency too, Ellie. And this is the kind of scandal that bankrupts reputations. We arranged the meeting in the old boathouse, a place Victor wouldn't suspect. It used to be Cole's favorite retreat, private, quiet, forgotten by most. Ellie, Mark, and I waited upstairs, and then, right on cue, Victor walked in, with Anthony Wilson and Gerald close behind. Touching, Victor sneered, eyeing us across the table. Family reunions always bring out the drama. I slid the envelope across the table. You came for control, but what happens if this story hits the press tomorrow morning? He opened it. He read. And for the first time since this power play began, I saw fear in his eyes. She was unwell, he snapped, though his voice cracked. She was scared of you, I replied. Gerald stared at the photographs in silence. This was the night of the 20th anniversary gala, he murmured. She left early, said she wasn't feeling well. Victor's hands clenched. This doesn't prove anything. It doesn't have to, I said, calm as ever. It just has to raise enough doubt to end your career. Silence fell over the room, and then Anthony Wilson stepped back, like a man realizing he'd backed the wrong horse. Gerald followed. Victor stood alone. Again. He lunged, his temper finally breaking, but this time Ellie stepped forward, between us, strong, unshaken. Touch me, she said quietly, and your past becomes tomorrow's headline. Victor's hand froze midair. Then slowly, he dropped it. And just like that, the tables turned. Victor stormed out of the boathouse that night, his jaw tight, hands shaking, but he didn't slam the door. He didn't need to. The damage was already done, and he knew it. By the next morning, Gerald had resigned from the board, citing personal ethical conflicts. Anthony Wilson's consulting contract was quietly terminated. No press release, no explanation, just silence, the corporate kind that always follows scandal. And Victor? He didn't even try to deny it. We had enough. Not definitive proof of murder, but plenty of documentation of abuse. Enough to destroy his credibility, bury him in legal questions, and obliterate any chance of him ever holding power again. Ellie moved quickly. She called for a private executive session, 1 hour before the official board meeting. In it, she laid everything bare. The Singapore incident, Mark's gambling debt manipulation, Victor's power grab, and the evidence of his past. No theatrics, just truth. But more importantly, she didn't present it alone. I stood beside her, one hand resting on the folder, the other on her shoulder. We weren't two enemies anymore. We were a unified front, past and future, experience and reform. And the board, terrified of scandal and desperate for stability, chose the only logical path. They sided with us. Victor's formal resignation came within 48 hours. The board called it a leadership realignment. Internally, we knew it was exile. We gave him a golden parachute, just enough to walk away quietly, just little enough to remind him he lost. Ellie offered no handshake, no goodbye, and I didn't need one. Some exits deserve silence, but the silence didn't last. 2 days later, the first anonymous tip hit a financial blog. Nothing confirmed, but speculation about Victor's quiet departure sparked curiosity. Then came whispers about the Singapore deal, the Caymans, the Marshall acquisition. The company's foundation wasn't just cracked, it was radioactive. People think this is the end, Ellie said to me one night as we looked over a media risk report. They always do when the truth shows up, I replied. So, what do we do? I looked at her, really looked at her. She wasn't the daughter who tried to dethrone me at Thanksgiving anymore. She wasn't a pawn in Victor's game. She was something else now. Now, I said, we rebuild on our terms. That night, we finalized the terms of our new arrangement, something the company had never seen before. Co-CEOs, not in name only, but in strategy. I would handle the boardroom, the old guard, the crises born from shadows. Ellie would lead the future, rethink our systems, institute ethics and transparency the company had never known. Victor had tried to burn us down. Instead, He lit the fire we needed, and as he disappeared from the headlines, we stepped into the spotlight, together. 6 months later, I stood on a stage I once built from nothing, watching my daughter stand beside me as my equal. Our company's annual leadership conference had always been a celebration of achievement, new products, market expansion, rising numbers. But this year, it felt different, real, raw, and maybe, finally honest. Victor was gone, not disgraced publicly, yet, but erased internally. His name never mentioned. His legacy wiped clean from every executive memo and historical briefing. The board had fallen in line. After all, they had no choice. Most of them had skeletons in their own closets, the kind Victor had collected like trophies. Gerald, surprisingly, had become an ally. Maybe guilt, maybe survival. Maybe he'd finally realized which direction history was heading. Ellie leaned toward the mic, her voice steady. 6 months ago, I thought I understood what it meant to lead. I thought a title made you powerful, but power without knowledge is just chaos, and ambition without integrity is a slow collapse. The crowd, hundreds of employees, executives, analysts, sat in total silence, hanging on her every word. I've made mistakes, she continued. My mother made sacrifices. Together we've done what most would never admit. We cleaned up our own empire, brick by brick. She looked at me and smiled, the kind of smile that didn't come from triumph, but clarity. We had stripped the company bare, ended offshore accounts, cut loose old partners, restructured leadership, rewrote policies, and opened the books. It cost us millions, and it was worth every cent, because what we had now was something far rarer than profit, principle. After the speech, we moved through the crowd like co-commanders of a rebuilt army. I noticed the way people looked at her, not as a daughter who inherited power, but as a woman who earned it. Later at the reception, Ellie pulled me aside. I found something, she said, in Dad's files. My heart paused. A letter, dated the year he was diagnosed. She handed it to me, creased and worn, in Cole's handwriting. If you're reading this, it means the company is yours now, or it will be soon. I want you to know, this business isn't perfect. I made choices I never told your mother about, but it was never meant to be my legacy. You are. Ellie blinked back tears. He meant it for me, but I think it was meant for both of us. I nodded, unable to speak. We had both spent decades chasing the illusion of power. Now we were building something better, purpose. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I had to fight to win. We were already winning, together. What would you do if your own daughter tried to take everything you built? Would you fight or teach her how to survive? We want to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below and tell us what you think Sharon should have done. If you enjoyed this story of power, betrayal, and redemption, make sure to hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next twist in our series. There's more where this came from, and trust us, the drama is just getting started. One click and you're in. Let's rewrite legacy together.